It was early morning in Chicago and smelled of wet pavement and freshly brewed coffee. Emily Harris sat at an old wooden table in her small third-floor apartment in a brick building on the working-class South Side. The window was slightly open, and the noise of the street, car horns, footsteps of hurrying passers-by, the distant wail of a siren, were intertwined with the silence of her home. On the table stood a mug of black coffee, steam rising in thin streams, and next to it lay a tattered notebook with notes on her charges. Emily, a 30-year-old woman with short dark hair pulled back into a neat ponytail, looked out at the street, where the first rays of sunlight were breaking through the gray clouds. Around her neck glittered a locket engraved with the initials D.H., a memento of her brother James, who had died in Afghanistan 6 years earlier. Emily's apartment was simple, almost Spartan. A wooden couch with gray pillows, a table with 2 chairs, a bookshelf filled with social work textbooks and a few books on military history. On the wall hung a photograph of James in uniform, young, with a big smile, holding a rifle. Nearby, in a small wooden box, were his medals. Emily rarely opened it, but every time she looked at the box, she felt a pang in her chest. She herself served in the U.S. Army for 8 years as a hand-to-hand combat instructor before a bombing in Iraq ended her career. Shrapnel had damaged her knee, and although the wound healed, the scar remained, as did the pain of losing her brother and the subsequent divorce. Emily sipped her coffee, her calloused hands gripping the mug tightly. She had risen before dawn, as she had done in the army. Mornings were her time, the moment when the city was not fully awake and she could gather her thoughts. Today was a special day. A reminder flashed on her phone. Titan MMA. Tryout. 1800. Emily hadn't worked out for fun in a long time, only for her job, helping teenagers at a rehab center. But something inside her was pushing her to get back to training, to the movement that had once been her anchor. The phone vibrated, displaying the name Lindsay. Emily answered, holding the phone to her ear. "Emily, are you serious?" Her sister's voice was worried, but with the usual note of concern. "This Titan gym. I heard it's full of rich people and athletes. Isn't it too dangerous?" Emily smiled, looking down at the locket as she absent-mindedly touched it with her fingers. "It's time to try, Lindsay. I can handle it." "That's what you always say," Lindsay sighed. "Just be careful, okay? After everything you've been through." "I know," Emily interrupted gently. "But sitting still isn't my thing. You know that." Lindsay paused, then added, "Call me later. Let me know how it went." "Okay," Emily said and hung up. She finished her coffee, washed her mug, and headed to the closet. On the hanger hung her workout clothes, black leggings, a simple t-shirt, sneakers, a little worn out, but comfortable. Emily pulled on the clothes, carefully tucked the medallion under the t-shirt, and looked in the mirror. Her face was calm, but her gray-green eyes were lit with determination. She knew that Titan wasn't her world. It was a place for those who posted their workouts on social media, for people with money and ambition. But she didn't care. She needed a challenge, something to give her back a sense of control. The South Side was waking up. Emily stepped out of her house, her light jacket wrapped tightly around her. The streets were filled with people, workers hurrying to their shifts, school children with backpacks walking to the bus stop. She passed the small cafe where she usually got coffee and nodded to a familiar barista through the window. The subway was a few blocks away, but Emily chose to walk, breathing in the chilly morning air. Her work at the rehab center began in an hour, and she wanted to have time to prepare. The center was located in an old building in the Garfield Park neighborhood. Emily worked with teenagers in trouble, some struggling with addiction, others with the effects of domestic violence. She was more than just a social worker to them. She was someone who understood what it was like to lose ground. Her military background taught her patience and the ability to reach out to those who were closing themselves off from the world. At the center, she entered her small office where files of work lay on the table. Today, she was to meet with Daniel, a 16-year-old boy who had come to the center after a fight at school. Emily opened his folder and skimmed through the entries. "Aggression. Problems with emotional regulation," the last note read. She closed the folder and checked her watch. It was time to begin. "Emily, you're early today," said her colleague Martha, a woman in her 40s, looking into the office. "Did you stay up half the night again?" "Habit," Emily answered, smiling. "How's Daniel?" "He's a tough nut to crack," Martha shook her head. "But he listens to you. I don't know how you do it." "Just listening back," Emily said, gathering up her papers. Daniel walked in 10 minutes later, tall and thin with a sullen look. He slumped into a chair, crossing his arms. "Talking again?" he muttered. "Not really," Emily said, sitting down across from him. "We're trying something new today. Breathing exercises. Helps when you're all boiling inside." Daniel rolled his eyes but agreed. Emily showed him a simple technique she'd learned in the military. Inhale for 4 counts, hold, exhale. She noticed his shoulders relax, though he tried not to show it. "What is this, like yoga?" he asked, squinting. "Something like that," Emily chuckled. "But without the mats and candles, just a way to keep yourself in check." By the end of the meeting, Daniel seemed a little less tense. Emily jotted a few lines down in his file and walked him to the door. The day went by in the usual rhythm. Meetings with mentees, discussions with colleagues, writing reports. But Emily's mind kept harping on the evening. Titan Hall, a new challenge. When the workday ended, she changed into her workout clothes and boarded the subway, heading downtown. Titan was in the upscale Loop, a converted warehouse with huge windows and neon signs. Emily walked into the lobby, which smelled of new plastic and sweat. Students in designer t-shirts and expensive bottles of water chatted at the front desk. She felt out of place, but she stepped forward. "New?" the guy behind the counter asked, still glued to his phone. "Yeah," Emily said. "Try out." He lazily handed her the form. Emily filled it out, providing only the bare essentials: name, age, contacts. She didn't mention the army or her skills. She didn't want attention, just the opportunity to move on. The sounds of punches, the coach's shouts, and laughter came from the gym. Emily adjusted her backpack and stepped inside. Several pairs of eyes looked at her, but she did not look away. In the center of the gym stood a man in his mid-30s, tall, with a short haircut and a black belt around his waist. Justin Crow, the head instructor. His gaze slid over Emily, and the corner of his mouth twitched in a barely noticeable smile. "Newbies rarely stay long," he said loudly, so that everyone could hear. "This is not a housewife's gym. This is serious business." Emily nodded, not arguing. She took a seat in the corner, watching the students. Most of them were young, confident, wearing expensive sneakers and tattoos. One girl stood out among them, Sarah Miller, with bright blonde hair and a quizzical look. She whispered something to her friend, and they both giggled, looking at Emily. The training began. Justin explained the basic holds, his voice sharp and commanding. Emily followed them precisely, her movements precise, almost mechanical. She felt her muscles remembering old skills, her body coming alive. But Justin stopped her. "Hey, new girl," he said, coming up. "Knees down. You're not out for a walk." Emily dropped her knees, though her posture was impeccable. She didn't argue. One thing she'd learned in the military was that sometimes it was best to keep quiet and wait. In the corner of the room, she noticed an older man watching the training. His name was Michael Walker, a veteran respected in Titan, though he rarely interfered. Their eyes met, and he nodded slightly as if assessing. Practice ended. Emily gathered her things, feeling the eyes on her. Sarah walked past, throwing out of your league, huh?" Emily didn't answer, just adjusted her backpack and walked out. It was cold outside, the streetlights casting long shadows. She pulled out her phone and texted Lindsay. "Everything went fine. I'll tell you tomorrow." But there was a spark in her chest. This wasn't just a gym. This was a challenge. And Emily Harris never backed down from a challenge. Emily Harris stepped through the glass doors of Titan Gym and was immediately hit by the smell of new linoleum and workout gear. The building in the Loop was gleaming with modernity. Huge windows letting in streetlights, gleaming exercise machines neatly arranged along the walls, and a buzz of self-assured voices. The students, mostly young men and a few women, sported branded t-shirts and logo shorts. Some took selfies in front of the mirror, others discussed the latest UFC fight, bragging about their social media followings. Emily, in a plain black t-shirt and scuffed sneakers, felt like an outsider, but her face remained calm. She adjusted her backpack on her shoulder and walked up to the front desk. "New?" the guy behind the desk asked, still staring at his phone. His name tag read, Chris. "Yeah," Emily said, her voice even and emotionless. "Try out." Chris lazily handed her a clipboard with a form on it. Emily filled in the fields: name, age, phone number. She didn't include anything about her military service or her martial arts skills. She didn't want the attention. She wanted the ring, the movement, the chance to feel like she was in action again. She handed the clipboard back and was given a temporary pass. "The gym is over there," Chris waved toward the wide doorway. "Practice is in 10 minutes. Don't be late. Justin doesn't like it when newbies drag their feet." Emily nodded and walked into the main hall. The space was impressive. A high ceiling with metal beams, soft mats on the floor, a ring in the center surrounded by ropes, and racks with punching bags. On the walls hung posters of fighters and motivational slogans. Win or learn. Strength in discipline. Strength in. The students were already gathering, stretching, and exchanging jokes. Emily noticed several pairs of eyes flicking over her, assessing her. She took a place in the corner, set her backpack on the floor, and began to stretch, slowly stretching her muscles. Her movements were precise, measured, like someone for whom discipline was second nature. A man in his mid-30s appeared in the center of the room, tall, with a short haircut and a black belt tied tightly around his waist. Justin Crow, the head instructor. His presence filled the room. Broad shoulders, a confident gait, a voice accustomed to giving commands. He clapped his hands, attracting attention. "Okay, everyone," he barked. "Newbies, keep up. This isn't a housewife's gym, this is serious business." His gaze swept over the group and settled on Emily. The corner of his mouth twitched in a slight smile. "New?" he said, not asking but stating. "What's your name?" "Emily Harris," she answered quietly, meeting his eyes. "Emily," Justin repeated, drawing out her name with a hint of mockery. "I hope you're ready to sweat. We don't like people who give up on the first week here." The students giggled. Emily didn't respond, just nodded slightly. She'd seen people like Justin before, people who used authority to suppress rather than inspire. In the army, she'd learned to recognize them when they first appeared. The training session began. Justin was explaining a basic collar grab and takedown. His voice was loud and sharp, and he moved among the students, adjusting their stances and making caustic comments. Emily was doing it precisely, her hands moving confidently, repeating the moves she had been practicing for years. But Justin stopped next to her. "Knees down, Harris," he said, crossing his arms. "You're not on a walk in the park." Emily dropped her knees, even though her stance was perfect. She knew there was no point in arguing. Better to show results than waste words. She continued to do the exercise, feeling her muscles come alive. Her body remembered the movements, the grab, the step, the jerk. Everything she had taught the soldiers, everything that had helped her survive in Iraq. Next to her, Sarah Miller, a young woman with bright blonde hair and a braid, was training. She glanced at Emily and whispered to her partner, a burly guy in a designer t-shirt. "Seriously? She's way out of her league here." Her partner chuckled, not looking up from his exercise. Emily heard it, but her face remained impassive. She concentrated on the movement, on her breathing, on the rhythm. In the army, she'd learned to ignore the ridicule. The main thing was the result. An older man stood in the corner of the room watching the training. Michael Walker, a veteran respected in Titan, though he rarely interfered. His gray hair and lined face spoke of years of service, and his eyes were sharp, assessing. He watched Emily perform the hold, smoothly, without wasted movement, with a precision you wouldn't expect from a novice. Their eyes met, and Michael nodded slightly, as if confirming something to himself. Justin, meanwhile, called two students to the center of the mat for a demonstration. He chose Sarah and her partner, demonstrating the proper way to escape the hold. Sarah moved confidently, with a slight smile, enjoying the attention. Justin praised her. "That's how it's done, Miller. Keep learning while you're good." Then he turned to the group. "Who wants to try?" he asked, looking around at the students. His gaze landed on Emily again. "New girl, come on. Show me what you've learned." Emily stepped forward, feeling everyone's eyes on her. She stood in front of Justin, who was a head taller and broader in the shoulders. He smirked. "Don't worry, I don't bite," he said loudly, drawing laughter. Emily didn't answer. She took her stance, her body relaxed but ready to move. Justin grabbed her collar, demonstrating his technique, but instead of giving her a gentle push like he did with the others, he yanked her down, trying to knock her off her feet. Emily kept her balance, instinctively shifting her weight onto her back leg. The room went silent, expecting her to fall, but she stayed upright. "Not bad," Justin said, but his tone was cold. "But the stand still sucks. Work on it." He walked away and Emily returned to her seat. Sarah, standing next to her, whispered to her friend. She almost collapsed. Why did she even come here? Emily pretended not to hear. She continued practicing, performing each movement with a precision that went unnoticed by others. But Michael Walker noticed. When the class ended, he approached her as she packed her backpack. "You're not a newbie," he said quietly, his voice low and slightly husky. "I can tell by the way you move. Where are you from?" Emily looked at him, her gray-green eyes calm but wary. "I just like order," she answered evasively. Michael smiled at the corner of his mouth. "Order is good. But here you'll have to prove that you don't just like order. Justin isn't the type to easily accept newcomers." "I can handle it," Emily said, throwing her backpack over her shoulder. She walked out of the room feeling the chill of the Chicago evening. The streets of the Loop were aglow with skyscraper lights, but Emily ignored them. She went down to the subway, where the noise of the trains drowned out her thoughts. In the car, she pulled out her phone and opened a text from Lindsay. "So how are things?" Emily started to type, but stopped. What to say? That they've already tried to put her in her place? That she feels like an outsider but isn't going to back down? Instead, she wrote, "It's okay. I'll tell you tomorrow." At home, she dropped her backpack on the couch and walked over to the mirror. James's locket glinted under her t-shirt. She touched it with her fingers, remembering his words. "Emily, strength isn't about screaming the loudest. It's about standing up when others fall." She nodded at her reflection, as if confirming something. Titan Gym wasn't just a workout. It was a challenge, and Emily Harris was up for it. The South Side morning began with gray skies and light rain pattering against the windows of Emily Harris's apartment. She sat at her wooden desk, sipping black coffee from the same mug she always used. On the table was a notebook with notes on her charges, and next to it a photograph of her brother James in his army uniform, his smile still alive even after all these years. Emily touched the locket with the initials DH hanging around his neck and took a deep breath. Today had been a busy day, work at the rehabilitation center, and in the evening, another class at the Titan Gym. After her first visit there, where she was met with ridicule, she felt a familiar fire ignite inside her, the one that helped her stand up in the army, in Iraq, in the darkest moments. Emily stood up, put on a dark blue sweatshirt, and packed her backpack. Her apartment, modest and almost empty, reflected her character. Nothing extra, only the essentials. A wooden sofa, 2 chairs, a shelf with books on social work and military history, a box with James's medals on the windowsill. The walls were thin, and she could hear the neighbor upstairs turning on the television and someone arguing about the electric bill on the other side of the wall. The noise was familiar, almost comforting, drowning out the memories that sometimes surfaced at night, explosions, screams, the smell of burning. She stepped outside, pulling her hood up. The South Side was alive with life. School children running to catch a bus, workers in orange vests repairing the road, and a street vendor selling hot donuts. Emily passed the cafe, nodded to the barista, and headed toward the subway. The rehab center in Garfield Park was a 20-minute drive away, but she loved those morning rides. On the subway, she watched the people, a tired woman with a baby, a student with headphones, an older man reading the newspaper. Chicago was alive, noisy, and Emily found something soothing in the rhythm. The center was an old brick building with peeling paint on the facade. It smelled of hand sanitizer and freshly brewed tea. Emily walked into her office, a small room with a metal desk, a stack of folders, and a whiteboard on which she drew lesson plans. Her colleague Martha, a woman with a good-natured smile, peered in the door. "Early again, Emily?" she said, holding a cup of tea. "Are you even sleeping?" "I am," Emily replied, smiling. "I'm just used to getting up early." "An army habit?" Martha winked. Emily shrugged. She rarely talked about her service, but her co-workers knew she was a veteran. It was evident in her posture, the way she carried herself. Calm, but alert. Today she was meeting Daniel, a 16-year-old boy who had been sent to the center after a fight at school. Emily opened his file. Aggression, problems with emotional regulation, conflict with teacher. She ran her eyes over the notes, remembering their last meeting. Daniel was stubborn, but there was a genuine pain in him that he hid behind a sullen look. Daniel walked into the office half an hour later, tall and thin, his arms crossed over his chest. His dark hair fell into his eyes, and his face wore his usual distrust. "Are we going to talk again?" he muttered, plopping down in a chair. "Not really," Emily said, sitting down across from him. "We're going to try something different today. Breathing exercises. They help when things are boiling inside." Daniel rolled his eyes but nodded anyway. Emily showed him the technique she'd learned in the army. Inhale for 4 counts, hold, exhale for 6. She sat next to him, watching his movements. "Is this some kind of yoga?" he asked, squinting. "No mats or candles?" Emily chuckled. "Just a way to keep yourself in check? Try again." Daniel sighed, but repeated himself. After a few minutes, his shoulders relaxed and his eyes became a little less piercing. Emily noticed and nodded. "Okay. Practice this at home, whenever you feel like you're about to explode." "Okay," he muttered, standing up. "Does this really work?" "It does," Emily said. "If you do it." Daniel left, and Emily wrote in his file, "Progress in emotional control. Recommend adding physical exercise." She knew that guys like Daniel needed action as well as talk. Her military experience had taught her that movement was the best way to deal with inner chaos. The day passed in a flurry of meetings with other trainees, discussions with colleagues about programs, and writing reports. At lunchtime, Emily went out to a small park near the center. The rain had stopped, and the air smelled damp. She found a bench under an old oak tree and began practicing her kicks in the air, her movements smooth and precise, as if she were back at the training ground. A passerby, a man in a business suit, cast a curious glance at her, but she paid no attention. Her body remembered every command. Step, turn, kick. This was not just an exercise. It was a way to get herself back. Michael Walker, the veteran from the Titan room, approached her. He wore a dark jacket and had a slight limp that only those who knew what to look for would notice. Emily stopped, wiping sweat from her forehead. "I didn't expect to see you here," Michael said, his voice low and slightly husky. "You're not a newbie, are you? I saw the way you moved around the gym. This isn't just a hobby." Emily looked at him, her gray-green eyes wary but calm. "I just like order," she said, avoiding a direct answer. Michael smiled, his lined face lighting up with warmth. "Order is good, but in Titan you'll have to show more. Justin doesn't like it when someone challenges him." "I'm not looking for trouble," Emily said, adjusting the medallion under her sweatshirt. "I just want to train." "Then hang in there," Michael said, clapping her on the shoulder, "and don't let it break you." He left, and Emily stood there, watching him go. She knew Michael was right. Titan Gym wasn't just a place to train, it was a place where people like Justin Crow made their own rules. But Emily wasn't going to play by their rules. She returned to the center, finished her workday, and headed home to change for the evening. At home, she opened her closet, pulled out her gym clothes, and looked at James's photo. "Strength isn't about shouting the loudest," he'd said. "It's about standing when others fall." Emily touched the locket and nodded. She didn't know what awaited her in Titan, but she was ready. She'd learned one thing in the military: the ones who don't give up survive. That evening, she walked into Titan Gym again. The atmosphere was the same as the first time: bright lights, the smell of sweat, the laughter of students. Justin stood in the center, explaining the technique of the throw. Emily took her place in the corner, but this time she noticed that Sarah Miller and her friend were exchanging glances, whispering something. Justin was looking at her more than he should have, too, his gaze cold and appraising. The workout had begun, and Emily was moving, feeling her body come alive. But she knew this was just the beginning, and something told her Justin wasn't going to make her life in the gym easy. The Chicago evening greeted Emily Harris with a chill wind as she stepped off the subway and headed toward Titan. The sky above the loop was a blaze of orange as the sunset reflected off the glass facades of the skyscrapers. Her backpack swung slightly on her shoulder, and a locket with her brother James's initials glinted under her t-shirt. Emily felt the tension building inside her after her second Titan class. Her first visit showed that Justin Crow, the head instructor, wasn't going to cut her any slack. His taunts and the looks from students like Sarah Miller were just the beginning, but Emily wasn't one to back down. She gritted her teeth, adjusted the strap of her backpack, and walked into the gym. Inside, everything was the same. Bright lights, the smell of sweat and plastic, the hum of voices. Students were stretching on mats, taking selfies in front of the mirror, showing off their new gear. Emily walked to her corner, dropped her backpack, and began stretching. Her movements were smooth, precise, almost mechanical, echoes of army training. She tried not to attract attention, but she could feel the eyes on her. Sarah Miller, with her bright braid and confident smile, was whispering to her friend, throwing mocking glances in Emily's direction. Emily ignored them, concentrating on her breathing. Inhale. Exhale. Count to 4. Justin Crowe appeared in the center of the room, clapping his hands. His black belt was tied so tightly it seemed part of his personality. He glanced around the group, lingering on Emily a little too long. "Okay, newbies, don't sleep," he barked. "We're working on throws today. If you can't handle it, don't waste my time." He began to explain the technique: collar grab, step, jerk, throw. His voice was sharp, commanding, as if he were not teaching but giving orders. Emily listened attentively, imitating the movements in her corner. Her body remembered these techniques. Years of training in the army had made them part of her instincts, but she was in no hurry to show it. Better to be underestimated than to attract unnecessary attention. Justin moved among the students, adjusting their stances. As he approached Emily, his gaze grew colder. "Harris," he said, crossing his arms. "Knees down." "What, are you in ballet?" The students giggled. Emily dropped her knees, though her posture was impeccable. She met his gaze, her gray-green eyes calm, but a spark ignited within. She knew the type. The ones who put others down to feel superior. She'd met them in the army, and she'd learned to bide her time. "Better," Justin muttered, walking away, but still weak. The training continued. Emily was working with a partner, a burly guy named Zach, who clearly wasn't taking her seriously. He was casually performing a hold, smirking as she slipped out of his grasp. Emily didn't react, concentrating on her technique, but Justin noticed her confidence. "Harris, center!" he called, pointing to the mats. "Let's show the group how to throw!" Emily stepped forward, feeling the room go quiet. All eyes were on her. Justin stood in front of her, his grin widening. "Don't worry, I'll be careful," he said loudly, drawing laughter. "Try to throw me off." Emily took her stance, her body relaxed but ready. Justin grabbed her collar, but instead of demonstrating the technique, he yanked her down with all his strength. Emily felt the air knocked out of her lungs, but her instincts kicked in. She shifted her weight, caught her balance, and stayed on her feet. The room gasped, expecting her to fall. Justin frowned, his face momentarily unsure. "Not bad," he said, but his tone was icy. "But it won't save you in a real fight." He walked away, and Emily returned to her seat. Sarah Miller, standing nearby, took out her phone and began filming, whispering to her friend, "We have to post this." The new girl nearly collapsed. Emily heard but didn't show it. She continued practicing, her movements precise, measured. When the class was over, she packed her backpack and headed for the exit. Sarah and her friend passed by, giggling. "Maybe you should go to yoga instead of here," Sarah said without turning around. Emily didn't answer. She stepped outside, where the cold wind hit her face. On the subway, she opened her phone and saw a notification. The video of her fall had already appeared on social media, with the caption, "Novichok fails in Titan." The comments were full of mockery. "Who even let her in?" And, "This isn't her place." Emily turned off the screen and looked out the dark window of the train. Her reflection was calm, but inside, she felt determination boiling. At home, she dropped her backpack on the couch and walked over to the mirror. James's locket glinted in the lamplight. She remembered his words. "Strength doesn't come from shouting the loudest. It comes from standing when others fall." Emily nodded at her reflection and headed toward the kitchen, where she turned on her laptop. She pulled up the training video and began to analyze it. Justin was strong, but his movements were predictable. He relied on brute force rather than technique. Emily knew that was her advantage. She pulled her boxing gloves out of the closet and began practicing punches on an imaginary opponent. Her movements were fast, precise, as if she were back on an army training ground. Sweat beaded on her forehead, but she didn't stop. Each punch was a response to the taunts, to the video, to Justin's arrogance. She wasn't going to give up. There was a knock at the door. Emily froze, wiped her sweat, and opened it. Michael Walker, the veteran from Titan, stood there. His dark jacket was wet from the rain, and he was holding a bottle of water. "I didn't expect you to leave so soon," he said, entering. "I saw what happened. Justin is overdoing it." Emily shrugged, motioning for him to sit down. "I'm used to it," she said, putting the kettle on. "It wasn't any easier in the army." Michael nodded, his gaze warm but serious. "I saw how you held up on the mat. You have skills, Emily. Don't let him break you. He's just afraid of those who might be better." "I don't want to be better," Emily said, sitting down across from him. "I just want to practice." "Then show them," Michael said, tapping his finger on the table. "Not with words. with actions. Justin's used to being afraid of him. But you're not the kind of person who's afraid, are you? Emily looked at him, a small smile touching her lips. True, she replied. Michael left, leaving her with that thought. Emily returned to the mirror, touched the locket, and took a deep breath. She knew it wouldn't be easy. Justin wouldn't stop, and the online video would only fuel the ridicule. But she wasn't going to back down. She opened her notebook and began writing. Justin's technique. Predictable attacks. Weak ground control. It wasn't just a plan. It was a challenge. And Emily Harris was ready to take it. Emily Harris walked into the South Side in the morning, a gray fog blanketing the streets and muffling the sounds of the city. She stood by the window of her small apartment, holding a mug of black coffee. The locket with her brother James's initials hung around her neck as always, glinting in the dim light. Glinting. Outside, people were hurrying to the subway, and the neighbor upstairs turned on the TV, filling the silence with a familiar hum. After the humiliation at Titan, where Justin Crowe knocked her down and Sarah Miller caught it on video, Emily felt a determination building inside her. The viral video with the caption "Newbie failed" had garnered hundreds of comments, but she refused to let them break her. Today, she decided to change her approach. Training would be her answer. Emily put on her workout clothes, packed her backpack, and left the house. Instead of taking the subway, she headed to a public gym a few blocks from her home. It was an old building with peeling paint and creaking doors where locals, teenagers, blue-collar workers, a few veterans, worked out. There was no Titan glitz here, but there was an atmosphere of respect and self-improvement. Emily walked in, nodding to the attendant, an old man named Joe who always greeted her with a smile. "You're early today, Emily," he said, adjusting his glasses. "Are you going to lift weights again?" "Not quite," she replied, smiling. "We need some mats and some space." She walked into a small gym with worn mats and punching bags. There were no neon signs or fancy exercise machines, but Emily didn't need them. She tossed her backpack in the corner and began her warm-up, jumping, stretching, punching the air. Her movements were precise. Precise. As if she were back at an army training base. She recalled the hand-to-hand combat lessons she taught soldiers: grab, step, throw. Her body remembered everything, despite her years of civilian life and a knee injury. Michael Walker, the veteran from Titan, approached her. He was wearing an old gray sweatshirt with a slight limp that showed his old wounds. Michael watched her, arms crossed. "I saw your video," he said, his voice low and slightly husky. "Justin crossed a line, but you were great." Emily stopped, wiped sweat from her forehead, and looked at him. "It's just the beginning," she replied. "He thinks he can squeeze me out. But I'm not leaving." Michael nodded. "Well said," Michael murmured, smiling. "Then let's get to work. Show me what you can do." Emily nodded and took a stance on the mat. Michael started with a simple hold, but she easily escaped his grasp with a quick step to the side. Then she countered with a smooth, precise counter, forcing Michael to one knee. He laughed as he stood up. "Damn, you're not kidding," he said, rubbing his wrist. "Where did you learn to do that?" "It's a long story," Emily said evasively, adjusting the medallion under her shirt. They continued training, practicing throws and holds. Michael was strict but fair. He pointed out small mistakes but praised accuracy. "You're faster than you look," he said. "Justin will regret underestimating you." Emily just nodded, focusing on the movement. She liked this place. No cameras, no taunts, just work and respect. That afternoon, she returned to the rehabilitation center in Garfield Park. Her client, Daniel, was waiting in the office, looking sullen as usual. Emily decided to try a new approach. After breathing exercises, she gave him a simple martial arts exercise, a basic stance and step. "Are you going to teach me how to fight?" he chuckled. "Not how to fight," Emily replied. "How to control yourself. Watch how I do it." She demonstrated the move. A step forward, a turn, a gentle push. Daniel followed reluctantly, but his eyes lit up as he felt the rhythm. By the end of the session, he seemed a little less tense. "That's cool," he said as he walked away. "Will you show me more?" "If you try hard enough," Emily replied with a smile. She returned to Titan in the evening. The atmosphere was the same. Noise, bright lights, arrogant looks. Justin immediately noticed her and challenged her to a sparring match, but deliberately chose her strongest partner, Zach. "Don't overdo it, Harris," Justin said with a smirk. "This isn't dancing." Emily took a stance. Zach attacked roughly, relying on strength. She dodged, using his momentum, and gently guided him to the mat. The room fell silent, and Justin frowned. "Accident," he muttered. "Again," Emily repeated, once again passing Zach. Sarah Miller whispered to her friend, "She's weird, but there's something about her." Justin excluded Emily from the next sparring session, saying, "Sit and learn." She watched silently, analyzing his movements. Her skills were growing, and she knew her time would come. At home, she opened her laptop, watched the workout video, and wrote in her notebook, "Justin, lots of power, little technique." She smiled. This wasn't just any gym. This was her arena, and she was ready. Morning Chicago greeted Emily Harris with a cold wind and the smell of wet asphalt. She stood at the window of her apartment on the south side, looking out at the gray streets where the first passers-by were hurrying to the subway. A mug of black coffee warmed her hands, and a medallion with her brother James's initials hung around her neck, as always, reminding her of her roots. The last few weeks at Titan Gym had been trying. Justin Crow's taunts, the video of her fall, the whispers of Sarah Miller and the other students. But Emily hadn't broken. She felt her body and mind returning to the strength honed by years of military training. Today, the gym announced the annual Mixed Martial Arts Open Tournament, an event that could change everything. Emily knew this was her chance. She pulled on a sweatshirt, packed a backpack, and left the house. Instead of Titan, she headed to the community gym where she trained under Michael Walker. The old building with its worn mats and creaking doors had become her sanctuary. There were no cameras or arrogance, just work and respect. Emily walked in, nodding at Joe, the attendant who was cleaning the coffee machine. "Early again, Emily?" he smiled. "The tournament is coming up, right?" "We need to be ready," she replied, throwing her backpack into the corner. She began her warm-up, jumping, stretching, punching the air. Her movements were quick, precise, as if she were back at a base in Iraq, training soldiers in hand-to-hand combat. Michael Walker showed up half an hour later, wearing his usual gray sweatshirt. His limp was barely noticeable, but Emily knew it was the result of years of service and old wounds. "I heard about the tournament," he said, crossing his arms. "Have you signed up?" "Yes," Emily said, wiping sweat from her forehead. "I'm signing up today." Michael nodded, his gaze stern but warm. "Justin will be there, and he won't go down without a fight. Are you ready for that?" "I'm ready," Emily said, her voice firm. "He thinks he knows me. But he's wrong." They began training. Michael showed her a few new techniques. A quick escape from a hold, a transition to the ground, a choke. He was stern but fair. "Keep your elbows close to your body," he said, "and don't give yourself away. It's not the loudest who wins, it's the smartest." Emily absorbed every word, her body moving faster, more precisely. She felt the skills dulled by years of civilian life coming back. "You were an instructor, weren't you?" Michael asked when they took a break. "It's not just a hobby. I can tell by the way you move." Emily looked at him, her gray-green eyes calm but wary. 8 years in the Army," she said quietly, "training soldiers in hand-to-hand combat, until I got blown up." Michael nodded, not asking any questions. "Then you know what real combat is," he said. "Use it. Justin is strong, but he relies on brute force. You can be faster." Emily smiled at the corner of her mouth. "I know," she replied, touching the locket. That afternoon, she returned to the rehabilitation center in Garfield Park. Her client, Daniel, was waiting in the office, looking sullen as usual. Emily decided to step up their training by adding martial arts. She showed him a basic hold and step, explaining how to keep his balance. "Are you going to teach me how to fight now?" he asked, squinting. "Not how to fight," Emily replied. "How to control yourself. Watch me do it." She demonstrated the movement. A step, a turn, a slight push. Daniel repeated it, awkwardly at first, but then his eyes lit up. By the end of the day, she was back home, ready for her evening session at Titan. She opened her laptop and watched videos of her training, analyzing her mistakes. Her notebook was filled with notes. Justin. Predictable attacks. Poor ground control. She knew the tournament would test not only her skills, but her character. Justin wasn't just an instructor. He was a symbol of everything that tried to break her. Prejudice, ridicule, arrogance. Emily walked into Titan Gym that evening. The atmosphere was tense. A poster announcing the tournament hung on the wall, and students were discussing their chances. Justin was standing at the front desk talking to Thomas Blake, the gym leader. He grinned when he saw Emily. "New girl," he said loudly, so everyone could hear. "Are you signing up for the tournament? You're just here for the crowd, you know?" Emily looked him in the eye, her face calm. "We'll see," she said shortly, and walked to the counter to sign up. Sarah Miller, standing next to her, whispered to her friend, "Seriously? She thinks she can do it?" Emily filled out the form, ignoring the whispers. She knew she was being underestimated, but that was to her advantage. The training session had begun, and Justin was picking on her as usual. But this time, Emily noticed that her movements were faster, more confident. She dodged her partner's attacks, counterattacked, and even Zach, her previous sparring partner, looked surprised. "Not bad, Harris," he said as she had him down on the mat in seconds. "Where do you get that from?" "Just practicing," Emily said, standing up. After practice, she stayed in the gym, practicing her punches on the bag. Michael watched from the corner, his eyes full of approval. When the gym was empty, he approached. "A tournament isn't just a fight," he said. "It's a moment when you show who you are. Not for them, for you." Emily nodded, her fingers brushing the locket. "I know," she said. "For me. And for James." At home, she received a call from her sister, Lindsay. Her sister's voice was worried. "Emily, are you really going to this tournament?" she asked. "After what they did to you? Why would you do that?" Emily looked at the picture of James on the wall. "Not for them, Lindsay," she said quietly. "For myself. To remember who I am." Lindsay paused, then sighed. "Just be careful, okay?" she said. "You've always been stubborn." Emily smiled. "It runs in the family," she said. She hung up and walked over to the mirror. The locket gleamed in the lamplight. Emily looked at her reflection, her eyes blazing with determination. She knew the tournament would be more than just a competition. This was her chance to prove she was more than what people thought she was. She opened her notebook and added a new entry. Tournament? Be faster, smarter, calmer. Then she put on her sneakers and went for a run in the Chicago night. The streets were empty. The streetlights cast long shadows. Emily ran, feeling like every step brought her closer to her goal. She was ready. The morning of the Chicago tournament was clear, with a slight chill that nipped at her cheeks. Emily Harris stood at the window of her South Side apartment, looking out at the waking city. A mug of black coffee warmed her hands, and a locket with her brother James's initials hung around her neck, glinting in the morning light. Today was the day of the Titan Gym's Open Mixed Martial Arts Tournament, an event that drew fighters from schools all over the city, and even from neighboring states. Emily knew she was in for more than just a fight, but also stares, taunts, and pressure. Justin Crow, Sarah Miller, and the other Titan students saw her as nothing more than a newcomer, but she was ready to prove them wrong. She finished her coffee, put on her workout clothes, and walked out of the house, feeling determination pulsing in her chest. The Titan Gym in the Loop was packed. Bright spotlights illuminated the ring, around which hundreds of spectators had gathered. Students, coaches, sponsors, local bloggers filming everything on their phones. Banners with the logos of Titan and sponsor brands hung on the walls. The air was buzzing with conversation, laughter, and the clanking of metal counters. Emily walked in, carrying a backpack with a simple black uniform on it. Her clothes contrasted with the brightly colored gear of the other fighters, but she didn't care. She walked to the reception area where Chris, the guy from the reception, sat at a desk. "Harris." Chris raised an eyebrow, checking the list. "Are you serious? Well, good luck." Emily nodded, took her number, and headed toward the locker room. There were whispers all around her. "That's the one from the video." The newbie Justin dropped. She ignored them, focusing on her breathing. Inhale for 4, exhale for 6. In the locker room, she changed, adjusted the medallion under her uniform, and looked in the mirror. Her gray-green eyes were calm, but there was a spark in them. She was ready. The tournament began with a loud announcement from the announcer. The crowd erupted in applause as the first fighters entered the ring. Emily sat on the bench watching the fights. Her first fight was in an hour, and she used the time to study her opponents. Michael Walker, her mentor, came over and sat down next to her. "You nervous?" he asked, his voice low and soothing. "No," Emily said, looking at the ring. "Just waiting." Michael smiled, his lined face lighting up. "Okay. Remember, you're not fighting for them. You're fighting for yourself. And for him." He nodded at the medallion peeking out from under her uniform. Emily touched the locket and nodded. She remembered James's words. Strength is standing when others fall. Today, she would prove it. Her name was announced over the loudspeaker. Emily Harris, Titan Hall, versus Mark Davis, West Side High. The room buzzed with laughter. Emily stood up, her steps confident. She climbed into the ring, feeling the eyes of the crowd on her. Mark, her opponent, was a burly guy in his mid-20s with a tattoo on his shoulder and a confident smirk. He clearly underestimated her, looking down on her. "Don't overdo it, newbie," he said, adjusting his gloves. Emily didn't answer, taking a stance. The referee gave the signal, and the fight began. Mark went on the attack, trying to crush her with brute force. Emily dodged, her movements light, almost dancing. She felt the rhythm of his attacks, anticipating each step. In the second minute, she caught his hand, made a quick transition, and took the fight to the ground. The room went silent as she applied a choke. Mark tapped the mat, surrendering. The referee raised her hand. "Emily Harris wins," the announcer announced. The crowd erupted in applause, but there was a sense of surprise in it. Emily stepped out of the ring, her face calm. She noticed Justin Crowe frown in the corner. Sarah Miller whispered to her friend, "Is this an accident?" Michael Walker walked up to Emily, clapping her on the shoulder. "Good job," he said. "You're in." Emily nodded, wiping away the sweat. Her next fight was in half an hour. She drank some water and sat back on the bench, analyzing her first opponent. Mark was strong, but predictable. She knew the next fights would be tougher. The second fight was announced shortly after. Emily Harris versus Caitlin Wilson, North Shore High. Caitlin was a decorated athlete with a flashy outfit and a confident smile. She entered the ring waving her arms to get the crowd going. The crowd applauded louder than they had for Emily. Sarah Miller, sitting in the front row, was filming on her phone, clearly expecting another failure. "Are you ready to lose, newbie?" Caitlin snapped, smirking. Emily took a stance, her gaze cold and focused. The fight had begun. Caitlin attacked quickly, her blows sharp, but Emily dodged, saving her strength. She waited for the moment, watching her opponent's rhythm. 3 minutes in, Caitlin opened up and Emily made a lightning-fast grab, taking the fight to the mat. She secured the position and finished with a choke. Caitlin tapped the mat. The referee raised Emily's hand again. "Emily Harris wins," the announcer announced. The crowd erupted in applause, now without laughter. Emily stepped out of the ring, her breathing even. She noticed Justin clenching his fists at the exit. His face was white, his eyes full of anger. Sarah Miller lowered her phone, her eyes wide. "What was that?" she muttered to her friend. Emily walked past without looking at her. Michael met her at the bench. "2 fights, 2 victories," he said, smiling. "They're starting to realize who you are." "Not yet," Emily replied, her voice quiet but firm. She sat up, drank some water, and looked out at the ring where the next fight was about to begin. Her medallion glinted under the spotlights, reflecting the light. The spectators whispered, exchanging glances. "Is that the one Justin dropped?" Emily ignored it. She knew the main fight was still to come. Justin Crowe watched her from the corner, his eyes blazing with fury. Emily met his gaze and nodded slightly as if to say, "I'm ready." She felt her body and mind merging into one, just like in the days when she taught soldiers to survive. Today, she fought not only for herself, but for James, for everyone who believed in her. And she wasn't going to stop. The Titan gym in the Loop was buzzing with tension. The spotlights bathed the ring in bright light, reflecting off the fighters' sweaty faces and the shiny mats. The crowd of spectators gathered for the annual mixed martial arts tournament was noisy, discussing the latest fights. Emily Harris sat on the bench, her breathing even, her gray-green eyes focused on the ring. She had just defeated 2 opponents, Mark Davis and the titled Caitlin Wilson. The crowd, which had initially greeted her with jeers, now grew silent as her name was called over the loudspeakers. The locket around her neck with Brother James's initials glinted in the light, reminding her why she was here. Today was her chance to prove she was more than just a newbie Justin Crowe was trying to humiliate. Emily adjusted her black uniform, her muscles warm but her body relaxed. She could feel the eyes on her, Titan students, sponsors, bloggers with phones. Sarah Miller, sitting in the front row, was no longer filming, her expression a mixture of surprise and confusion. Michael Walker, her mentor, stood nearby, arms crossed. He nodded at her, his lined face aglow with pride. "You're ready," he said quietly. "This is your moment." Emily nodded, touching the locket. She remembered James's words. "Strength is standing when others fall." Today, she stood not only for herself, but for him as well. The loudspeaker boomed. Semifinals! Emily Harris, Titan Hall versus Justin Crowe. Titan Hall! The crowd erupted in applause, mixed with surprised exclamations. Emily stepped into the ring, her steps confident but calm. Justin followed, his black belt tied tightly, his broad shoulders tense. His face was a mask of confidence, but there was a flicker of worry in his eyes. He hadn't expected Emily to make it to the semifinals. The crowd began to buzz with anticipation. Someone shouted, "Show her, Justin!" Justin stopped in front of Emily, his grin forced. "I didn't think you'd make it this far, Harris," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "But this is the end. Get ready for class." Emily looked him in the eye, her face impassive. "Class has already started," she said quietly but firmly. The judge raised his hand, giving the signal. The court fell silent. Justin moved first, his attack lightning fast. He tried to grab Emily by the collar, using his strength and height. Emily dodged, her movements fluid, almost dancing. She felt the rhythm of his attacks, anticipating each step. Justin lunged again, but she stepped to the side, caught his hand, and used his momentum to take the fight to the ground. The crowd gasped, not expecting such speed. Emily secured the position, her knee pinning Justin to the mat. He tried to break free, his face red with the effort, but she was mechanically precise. She isolated his arm and began to apply a painful hold. Justin resisted, his muscles tensed, but Emily was faster. 20 seconds later, he hit the mat, admitting defeat. The referee shouted, "Stop!" The crowd erupted in applause. Emily stood up, adjusted her uniform, and nodded to the judge. She didn't raise a fist, didn't smile, just bowed and walked out of the ring. Justin remained sitting on the mat, his face flushed with rage and shame. He jumped up, avoiding their eyes, and walked quickly toward the locker room, pushing his way through the crowd. Sarah Miller, who was sitting in the front row, hung her head, her cheeks flushed. She whispered to her friend, "I was wrong. I was so wrong." Emily returned to the bench, her breathing even. Michael came over, clapping her on the shoulder. 20 seconds, he said, smiling. "You made it in 20 seconds. Your brother would be proud." Emily touched the locket, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Thank you," she said quietly. Thomas Blake, the head of Titan Gym, watched from the corner, his expression a mixture of surprise and concern. He knew Emily's victory over Justin was more than just a sporting achievement. It was a challenge to his authority, to the reputation of the gym. He exchanged glances with the tournament organizer, who was already writing something down in a notebook. The audience continued to applaud. Some stood up, filming the fight on their phones. The video of this moment, Emily knew, would fly around social media. Just like her failure a few weeks ago, few weeks. She drank some water, looking at the ring where the next fight was about to begin. Her body was warm, but her mind was cold. She had beaten Justin, but the tournament was not over. The final was ahead, and she knew she would be up against someone stronger. But in that moment, sitting on the bench, she felt the weight of the last few weeks, the taunts, the videos, the doubts, dissolve. She had proven she could stand. Sarah Miller came up to her unexpectedly. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a braid, but her confident smile was gone. She looked confused. "Emily," she said, her voice shaking. I was wrong. You're not who I thought." Emily looked at her, her gaze calm but direct. "The main thing is to understand and change," she said. "That's all that matters." Sarah nodded, her cheeks turning even redder. She left without another word. Emily turned to Michael, who had been watching the scene. "She'll learn," he said, "and so will Justin. But you, Emily, you've already shown who you are." Emily didn't answer, just looked at the medallion that had slipped out from under her uniform. She tucked it back in and stood up, preparing for the next stage. The room was buzzing, but there was something new in that buzz now. Respect. She knew that this fight had changed not only her, but also the perception of those who thought she was weak. And she was ready to move on, step by step, as the Army had taught her, as James had taught her. Titan Gym fell silent as Emily Harris walked out of the ring after defeating Justin Crowe. The bright lights still illuminated the mats, but the crowd's roar had turned to surprised whispers. Spectators glanced at each other, discussing the fight that had lasted only 20 seconds. Emily, in her simple black uniform, sat on the bench, wiping sweat from her face. Her breathing was even, and her gray-green eyes were far away, as if she was still replaying the fight in her head. The locket with Brother James's initials on it hung around her neck, glinting in the light, reminding her of the purpose for which she was here. Beating Justin wasn't just a triumph in the ring, it changed everything. Michael Walker, her mentor, stood next to her, arms crossed. His lined face glowed with pride, but he was slow to speak. He knew Emily didn't need big words. Her actions spoke for themselves. The room was slowly coming to life. The announcer announced the next fight. The crowd began to buzz, but the atmosphere was different. Emily could feel the eyes on her. Some were looking with respect, some with distrust, and some, like Sarah Miller, with obvious embarrassment. The video of the fight, Emily was sure, was already circulating on social media, replacing the embarrassing video of her fall a few weeks earlier. Thomas Blake, the leader of the Titan Gym, approached her. His dark suit and neatly coiffed hair contrasted with the sweaty, noisy atmosphere of the tournament. He looked worried, but his voice was even. "Emily," he said, stopping in front of her. "That was unexpected. Congratulations." Emily nodded, her face calm. "Thank you," she said shortly, taking a sip from her bottle of water. Thomas hesitated as if choosing his words. "We could use a fighter like you," he continued. "Teach, train. You've shown that you can do more than just participate." Emily looked at him, her gaze direct but not challenging. "I'll think about it," she said, "but I have my own plans." Thomas nodded, clearly not used to being turned down, and walked away, glancing at the tournament organizers. Emily knew that her victory over Justin had caused problems as well as admiration. Justin was Titan's star, the face of their brand, and his loss to a newbie could hurt the gym's reputation. But she didn't care. She wasn't fighting for their approval. Within days of the event, news of the fight had spread throughout Chicago. A video taken by spectators went viral, racking up thousands of views overnight. Comments on social media were full of excitement. "Who is this girl?" Justin got what he deserved. But there were others. Titan students began sharing stories about Justin's behavior, his sexist jokes, his bullying of new students, his arrogance. Social media posts flooded with complaints, and soon, Thomas Blake announced that Justin had been suspended from teaching for an internal investigation. Emily was sitting in her office at the Garfield Park halfway house when Sarah Miller suddenly appeared at the door. Her blonde hair was down and her face was unusually serious. She was fiddling with the strap of her purse, clearly nervous. "Emily," she began, her voice shaking. I'm sorry. I was terrible. With the video. With the taunting. I was wrong." Emily put down Daniel's file and looked at Sarah. Her gaze was calm but direct. "The main thing is to understand and change," she said. "You took a step. That's something." Sarah nodded, her cheeks flushing. "I want to be better," she murmured. "Like you." Emily smiled slightly, touching the locket. "Then work on yourself," she replied. "It's the only way." Sarah left, and Emily returned to work. She felt that her victory had changed not only her, but those around her. Daniel, her protege, became more confident in the classes, repeating the techniques she had shown him. Colleagues at the center began asking about the tournament, and some even suggested adding martial arts elements to the teen program. Emily thought about it. This was a chance to use her skills not only for herself, but for others as well. That evening, she met her sister Lindsay at a small cafe on the south side. Lindsay, in her bright jacket and warm smile, hugged her as Emily walked in. "You did it, Emily," she said, her eyes shining. "I saw the video. You were incredible." Emily smiled as she sat down. She ordered a coffee, her fingers instinctively touching the locket. "It wasn't for them, Lindsay," she said quietly. "For myself. And for James." Lindsay nodded, her eyes softening. "He would have been so proud," she said. "But Emily, what now? Will you stay in this room?" Emily shook her head. "Titan isn't my place," she said. "I want to create something of my own. A program for the kids at the center. Use martial arts to help them find themselves." Lindsay smiled, squeezing her hand. "That's so like you," she said. "Always helping others." Emily got home late. She opened her laptop and began to map out a program. Training for teenagers and veterans, based on discipline and control. She knew it would be difficult, finding funding, space, equipment, but she felt like this was her path. She looked at James's photo on the wall, his smile encouraging her. "Strength is in standing," he'd said. And Emily stood. A few days later, she received a message from Thomas Blake, who again offered her the role of instructor at Titan. Emily responded briefly, "Thank you, but I have other plans." She knew her victory in the tournament had opened doors, but she had chosen her path, not for glory, but for those who needed her help. The Titan Hall was just the beginning. Now she was building her future, one step at a time, as the Army had taught her, as James had taught her. 6 months have passed since the tournament at Titan Hall, and Chicago has returned to its normal life. But for Emily Harris, everything has changed. The morning South Side greeted her with the usual noise, car horns, footsteps, the smell of coffee from a nearby cafe. She stood by the window of her modest apartment, holding a mug of black coffee. The medallion with her brother James's initials hung around her neck as always, glinting in the morning light. Beating Justin Crowe at the tournament had been a turning point, not just for her, but for those around her. Emily was now building something more than just a fighting career. She was building a legacy. Her martial arts program at the Garfield Park Rehabilitation Center was gaining popularity. Starting with a small group of teenagers, it quickly grew, attracting not only young people but also veterans looking for a way to cope with the traumas of their past. Emily transformed the center's old gym into a workout space, mats, punching bags, simple exercise machines bought with a grant she spent 3 months trying to secure. She began each session with breathing exercises taught to her by the Army and ended with talks about discipline and respect. Her clients, like Daniel, found it not just a sport, but a way to gain control over their lives. Emily walked into the center early in the morning carrying a backpack with her training uniform. Her colleague Martha met her at the entrance holding a folder with new applications. "Emily, did you see?" Martha said, her eyes shining. 10 more people have signed up for your classes. We're going to need a bigger room soon." Emily smiled, adjusting her medallion. "This is just the beginning," she said. "The main thing is that they come." She walked into the room where her students had already gathered. Daniel, now more confident, was practicing his punches on the punching bag. Nearby, 2 veterans were training, whom Emily was teaching hand-to-hand combat techniques. She saw their faces, initially closed and tense, begin to glow with determination. This was her victory. Not in the ring, but here, helping people get back on their feet. Michael Walker, her Titan mentor, became her constant companion. His strict style complemented Emily's approach. She was patient. He was demanding. Together, they created a program that combined physical fitness with emotional resilience. Michael walked into the gym carrying a box of new gloves. "The sponsors were generous," he said, grinning. "I guess your fame from the tournament is still working." Emily shook her head, smiling. "It's not my fame," she replied. "It's their work." She nodded at the students. That evening, Emily received an unexpected text from Justin Crowe. He asked her to meet him at a nearby cafe. Emily agreed, though cautiously. She walked into a small cafe on the south side that smelled of freshly brewed coffee and baked goods. Justin was sitting at a table in the corner, his black belt replaced by a casual jacket, and his face looked unusually tired. He stood up as she approached. "Emily," he began, his voice quiet. "I'm sorry. I was wrong. You were right, and I was an idiot." Emily looked at him, her gray-green eyes calm but attentive. She could see that his words were sincere. The loss at the tournament and the subsequent suspension had made him reconsider a lot of things. "The important thing is that you understand," she said. "That's a step forward." Justin nodded, his shoulders slumping. "I want to go back to Titan," he said, "but not like before. I want to be better. Maybe you can give me some advice." Emily smiled slightly as she touched the locket. "Start with respect," she said. "For yourself and others. The rest will follow." They talked for a few more minutes and Justin left, leaving Emily with the feeling that even he could change. She knew that not everyone would accept her lessons, but if even one person like Justin began to change, that was a victory. A few days later, Emily met Sarah Miller at the center. Sarah, whose ridicule had once hurt, was now volunteering, helping organize classes. She told Emily that she had applied to college to study social work, inspired by her example. "You showed me that there is another way to be strong," Sarah said, her voice sincere. "Not by yelling, not by humiliating, but by just doing." Emily nodded, her heart clenching with a warm feeling. You already do, she replied. Go on. On her day off, Emily went to a veterans memorial outside Chicago. She stood in front of a stone with the names of the fallen, including James's. She placed a photo of her students by the stone, laughing, practicing, alive. An older veteran standing nearby recognized her. You're James Harris's sister, he said, his voice shaking with age. He was a good guy. You're carrying on his legacy. Emily looked at him, her eyes watering, but she held back her tears. I'm trying, she answered quietly. She returned to the center where another class awaited her. The students had gathered in the hall, their voices filling the space with life. Emily donned her uniform, the medallion glittering against the fabric. She stepped onto the mats and clapped her hands, drawing attention. Strength comes from discipline and respect, she said, her voice firm but warm. Everything else is just tools. Let's begin. The students took their places, their faces focused. Emily began the class, demonstrating a basic grip. She felt her work, her struggles, her victories, coalescing into something greater. A legacy she would leave behind. Not for glory, but for those who came after her. For James. For herself.